from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer, and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television, as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Loren Norris.
I was watching just yesterday, in fact, a highlight reel YouTube of Family Feud. And when the lady was asked the question, what is something that happens to you that, it's a bad time for something to happen? Why would the power go out? That kind of question. The answer that she gave really stumped Steve. First, her accent was way beyond what he could understand, and she had to say it 2 or 3 times, and so then finally they were able to translate what she was saying was foreshadowing. And he's like, I don't get it. And the truth was, what she was saying resonated deeply, not with just her team, but with her contestants, the competitors, and the entire audience. Everybody in the room knew what she meant by foreshadowing rather than what Steve understood. And the reason was, it was all about culture. The conversation had to do with what goes on here in this place where we are now. And when she said foreshadowing, everybody else was like, oh yeah, well, then that's just a fact of life. And they literally had to explain it to him. And I want to explain that to you a little bit more because it is a cultural reality. And if you're a leader and you want to lead the narrative, you've got to be aware of the cultural changes as you transition through them. Some things are going to hit you in the head like a brick, and some of them are going to go completely over your head or around you, and they will miss you completely. But if you're a leader and you want to lead the narrative, you've got to understand the culture that you're in when you do so. Today on Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And when she said foreshadowing, he was asking the question, why might the power go off? What is a reason that the power would go out? And, people might think of a lightning storm, which we're actually having one right now in Dallas. And I'm hoping my studio is safe because I hear all kinds of thunder and the power's already been off once, and that's not a good thing for sensitive digital equipment. But when he asked her why might the power go off, she said foreshadowing, and he said, I don't get it, because most of us, when we think of shedding, well, we think of a dog or a cat. We think of fur all over the place. And when she said foreshadowing, what she meant was that the city sometimes will do what we in America might call a rolling brownout or a rolling blackout, where certain parts of town lose power for a bit of time because the demand of electricity is too high. Maybe it's in a super cold season or a super hot season or that kind of thing. Well, when she said foreshadowing, that was kind of a shock to the system for Steve. And he said, well, how often does the city do this? Just turn off the power in order to conserve energy? And she said, daily. He said, no, they don't. I mean, seriously. She said, daily. And the entire audience replied and said, they do it every day. He said, why would anybody do that? Why would you turn off the power every day? There's plenty of electricity for the world. Everybody in the world has electricity. And the crowd replied, not in South Africa. Not in South Africa. Now, I want you to understand that as we move into a more global society, it's more common that people who migrate from one part of the world to another or who visit another part of the world experience cultural differences that they don't expect. And if you take those cultural differences with a shock or with the assumption, as sadly many Americans do, that, well, that's not the way it is in America, you need to fix it, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. It's an unfair assumption in a lot of places. Most parts of the world would consider America to be privileged and advantaged, and we are. Beyond imagination, we are. The irony to me is the number of people who want to change America into something like the countries who are still longing to be like America. I do not get that. I've been to Cuba. I've been to Brazil. I've been to the Congo more than once. I've been all over various parts of Europe. I've been to Honduras. These are not places that our lifestyle wants to emulate. In fact, most of those cultures look to the American way of life and say, we want to be more like that. The idea that the electricity is turned off. Now, I've been in the Congo when they did do that. On every street corner, there's a generator. Sometimes the block of people on that block, the houses and the businesses on that block have purchased their own diesel-powered generator. And it kicks on automatically at a certain time and it runs overnight. I've also been in homes where they don't own a refrigerator because it would be irrelevant. Because the power goes off, and sometimes it'll go off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and stay off for 4 or 5 days. Because that's how they keep enough electricity in the cities. The rural areas are not allowed to have power after a certain period of time. That is also how they keep people moving into the city, because you just can't make it on your own unless you know how to rough it without power out in the sticks, so to speak. But I've been in those homes where they don't own a refrigerator and their only hot water comes from water boiled over a fire. If you want to make tea or you want to make coffee, you boil your water over a fire and then you can have it. And most of that water comes right out of the river, because without electricity, there's no water pumps to run the water to your house either. To think that that would be true in 2017 when I was there is mind-boggling for most Americans, but it is true. And it's not the only place on earth, the Congo, where that is true. But when you realize that that's true, speaking with the assumption or leading with the assumption that the expectations that you have of life are the expectations that they have of life, that's a real problem. You know, this week there was a major culture shock that took place. In fact, it was just yesterday that a guy by the name of Musk walked in carrying a sink to the headquarters of Twitter and said, let that sink in. He's there. He's already letting people go. But if you go back and watch, and you can find them all over Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else, you can find employees of Twitter who in the past have done what they call a day in the life of a Twitter employee. And they go through the whole process of what it's like to work there, what it's like to have a job there, what is a day in the life of someone like that. What's that life like? And if you think that the average American is spoiled compared to the rest of the world, a place where what you would consider to be a $25 lunch is free in the cafeteria, and lattes until you're full of latte, and breaks on the roof of the building like they get at Meta, that where you can just literally go to the roof and see the city and enjoy the view. And if you want to work out, there's a gym on site and you can do that, and blah, 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 blah. The employee conditions at work are probably better than the average person in America to begin with. Now, if you live in some place like Cuba or Brazil or the Congo or Honduras, and you see those videos and you think to yourself, if that's what it's like to go to work, just let me work. I don't even have to have a home. That's better. Lunch break there is better than my life. That's what I want. And there's a misconception there. There's a missed perception there. There's a narrative about what life should be like, and it sets a whole different set of expectations. I can tell you, though, that the time that I was in the Congo, I grew up pretty close to dirt poor. Potato soup and food stamps was average fare for me the whole time I was in middle school and high school. No big surprise. I had my own job when I was 13 years old. when there weren't a whole lot of issues about child labor laws. I was baling hay and working in the grocery store and doing everything I could to contribute to the household income after my stepdad died. So I know what it's like to live close to the edge of having absolutely nothing. Been there, done that. I get it. I've also had those times earning close to six figures where my family could pretty much do anything they wanted to. Been there, done that. Have I ever been uber wealthy? No. Do I care to? I'm sure I would find a way to spend the money, but it's not the pursuit of my life. So when I go to the Congo and a friend says, hey, I want to go visit a relative, a family member, they don't live like the rest of us, I think to myself, well, it's the Congo. Nobody lives like the rest of us. Nobody here lives like I would expect to live in America. So no big deal. But I've also been to Appalachia. I've also been to East Texas. I've also been to the inner cities of Dallas and Houston and Chicago and Erie, Pennsylvania. And I get it. It was no shock to me to know that not everybody lives the same lifestyle. I have not led a sheltered life. So we get in the car and we drive as far as we can, and we get to the place where there are no roads left and we have to park and we have to walk. And when we park, the driver of the car gets out and he hands money to a probably 20-something guy who's standing there, and they have a conversation in French that I'm not privy to, and we walk away. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, this is not a valet. This is more like the guy you pay on the streets of San Francisco to make sure the hubcaps are still on your car when you come back. And so he just made his way and leaned against the car. Now, as far back as the 1980s, when my family drove to Laredo and went across the border into Mexico, I remember my uncle paying someone to keep an eye on our car while we walked around the little shops. So that's not a big shock to me. But we walked another couple of miles and we met the family and we went in to sit down and eat. And they put a plate on the table with food on it. One plate, 5 people. And at first I thought, are they inviting us to dinner? Is this an appetizer? And so I kind of took a minute to register. But as the conversation pursued, I understood that they were offering to share their evening family meal with the 3 of us who came to visit them. And I didn't want to be rude and say, I'm refusing your food, because that would be hurtful. I also didn't want to eat to my fill, because that would leave them nothing. And so trying to figure out where the balance of that was a different cultural experience for me. It was a learning curve. We had some great conversations. We spent a couple hours together. We prayed for them, and then we left. I didn't think much about it other than, wow, that was a new, rich experience for me. That was a huge opportunity. Until just a few weeks ago, I was actually sitting with one of the guys that was with me on that trip and his son. And he brought up that trip. And when he explained to his son that we had gone to visit those people and where they lived, his son's eyes got like this big. And you would have thought we had walked into the lair of the dragon, the most dangerous place in the world, as the place that we went to visit. It's just another day in the life to me. It was no big deal. But to him, the way he explained it was to say, you don't know the impression that it had on me and my family that you were willing to go to that kind of place to love on them. Now, that wasn't the first time I had heard that. About 2 weeks before that, I had heard the same thing from the other guy that was on that trip, who was formerly the governor of the most violent region on earth, the Kasai region of the Congo. He was the third party on that trip that walked with us. He was the guy that tipped the driver and said, keep an eye on the car. He was the guy that escorted us through it all because everybody was afraid of him. But when he explained to someone else that I was having lunch with that day that this guy with this color of skin went to that kind of place that most people from there wouldn't go to, he's a different kind of guy. It really shook me because I didn't realize what kind of sacrifice that was. I had no idea how far out on a limb I was going. And I didn't ask. And honestly, I didn't care. And I don't say this to impress you. I say this because it's a revelation to me that that's not everyone's norm. See, I was invited to come and meet a family. I was invited to meet people who were very important to the people that I was with. People that they care deeply about, that they haven't seen in decades because they're on opposite sides of the world. I was invited to participate in that relationship. And that was an honor to me. That was a privilege to me. Was it different? Oh yeah, as different as anything I've ever experienced. It was different in every way. But I wouldn't have considered it frightening or dangerous. I felt like I was getting a chance to experience life in a different way. Well, what does all that have to do with leadership? I think the challenge that we have in leadership for a lot of people is the reality that we see the world through the lens that we live in and nothing else. We're not looking to experience life through someone else's lens. We all want to have that day in the life of a Twitter employee or a day in the life of a Meta employee experience. We want to wake up in the morning and catch the train and a beautiful ride to work and have a few lattes and a workout before going to our desk, and then lunch with others over a gourmet meal on the rooftop as we behold the beauty of the city and blah, 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 blah. And if you're a 20-something with a fresh college degree and that's the life you're living, you haven't tasted reality for most people yet. In fact, go to a place like Wisconsin where they wake up at 4:15 in the morning and the first thing they do is shovel cow poo. And the next thing they do is bathe the pigs. And then they shear the sheep. Or they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they jump on a combine to be able to plow the field so that you can have corn for your cereal or your tortillas. And see, that's the day in the life of a lot of people. When it comes to leading the narrative as a leader, you've got to be aware of the culture that you're in. Not just the culture shock like Steve of, what, they turn off the electricity? That's insane. Why would you do that? But to understand the heart and soul of the people that you're talking to. In America, we call them the flyover states, that belt of middle America where a lot of the work is done, where a lot of the food is produced, where a lot of the land is maintained, where a lot of the horses and cattle are cared for. And in that belt of middle America, the flyover states, it's a different culture than it is on either one of the coasts. It's a different culture than Twitter or DC. And if you're going to lead people, you should take the time to get to know the people. Or as my mentor, John Maxwell, says, walk slowly among the crowd. Get to know who it is that you're talking to. So the stories that you tell are relative to them. So the things that you say are important to them and not just to you. So that you're not trying to impress them with who you are and what you've accomplished, but you're connecting with them on an emotional level of who they are and what's important to them. Because their priorities will always speak volumes. Dale Carnegie says it best. Always speak in the terms of the other person's interest. If you can manage to do that, you can lead the narrative well. But you can't do any of that until you take the time to get to know the culture that you're in now or you're about to be in. That is a requirement of good leadership if they want to lead the narrative. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.